This is a map of the Korean peninsula. And right here, running through the middle, is the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. It's the world's most heavily fortified border, a 248-kilometer belt separating South Korea from its neighbor to the north. Here along the North Korean side, you can see these fortifications. Thousands of soldiers stand guard to ensure the country remains one of the most isolated on Earth. Okay, you might already know about this part of the border, but there's more. North Korea's coastline is also enclosed by electrified fences, and there are more than just the physical barriers. North Korea has its own national internet, its own film industry, and of course, its own first family. This is how North Korea became the world's most reclusive country. North Korea is one of the last remnants of the Cold War. The country is run by a dynastic Stalinist dictatorship focused on maintaining national secrecy and doing everything it can to keep its people away from outside information. Why? According to experts, it comes down to a simple reason.
Survival. Yeah, so the North Korean leadership primarily is focused on survival in a hostile world, surrounded by much stronger neighbors.
From the outside, North Korea is often presented as an odd yet menacing rogue state.
A developing story right now, North Korea has blown up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office.
North Korea claims it has carried out a successful test of an underwater nuclear-capable drone.
North Korea appears to have made good on its threat to send rubbish over the border to South Korea.
But experts say much of the country's posturing and a focus on its nuclear weapons program despite growing international sanctions has a lot to do with the Kim regime's concerns about a potential collapse, triggered either by outside forces
만약 북한이 핵무기 사용을 기도한다면 우리 군과 한미 동맹의 결연하고 압도적인 대응에 직면하게 될 것입니다. 그날이 바로 북한 정권 종말의 날이 될 것입니다.
or by internal matters. That's been the case for almost as long as the quasi-monarchical regime has existed. Since its establishment in 1948, North Korea has been ruled by 3 generations of the Kim family. The dynasty's founder was Kim Il-sung. His son, Kim Jong-il, took the reins next, followed by grandson Kim Jong-un, who's currently in charge. It was Kim Il-sung who initially set North Korea on the path to shutting out much of the world. He had been groomed for leadership by the former Soviet Union and at first set up a similar government.
So everything looked like pretty much Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. Very strict control, censorship, and isolation, control over foreign troops, everything you would expect.
But North Korea's system would soon split off to develop into its own homegrown ideology, Juche. The Juche Manifesto, published in 1982 by Kim Jong-il, stresses that a true socialist revolution can only be achieved via self-reliance, be it politically, economically, or militarily. Juche further outlines the need for a single vanguardist leader and defiance towards foreign ideas. Juche ideology soon dominated North Korean political thought and society, although the country has been and remains to this day economically dependent on foreign support. Kim further distanced his regime from China and the Soviet Union by installing a father-to-son type of succession.
Unlike any other communist leader before him, Kim Il-sung decided to transfer power to his son, partially because he saw how Joseph Stalin's heritage was overthrown and overwritten by his Joseph Stalin's former disciples and lieutenants. Kim Il-sung, who saw it, he decided that he would go a different way.
What is the problem there? Well, communist ideology rails against aristocracy, monarchy, father-to-son succession and privileges and so on. So there's a contradiction there.
In effect, the Stalinist country would transform itself into a reclusive state where foreign ideas were frowned upon, traditional culture encouraged, and ultra-nationalism and loyalty to the Kims exalted. Why the shift away from Soviet-style policies? Kim Il-sung and his successor Kim Jong-il were obsessed with something that remains a key facet of the worldview of North Korean leaders: the end of their regime. Today, that worldview is reflected in moments like this, when a court sentenced 2 teens to hard labor for watching banned K-dramas. But the impact of Pyongyang's focus and ideology goes far deeper than banning South Korean television shows.
The Workers' Party dominates everyday life. It's sub-organizations, there are leagues, there are party-affiliated groups, even for children. And the intent, I believe, is to systematically indoctrinate the entire North Korean population, that the supreme leader, again, is a demigod, and the Workers' Party takes care of all North Korean people and demands in return absolute loyalty.
But why does the North's concern about South Korean cultural influence lead to a push to control its population?
The fact that a rich, prosperous, pleasant Korean state exists, namely South Korea, this is a long-term existential threat for the Kim dynasty.
The Pyongyang regime may also be wary of ending up like East Germany, which was swallowed up by West Germany after communist rule ended in 1989. South Korea's liberal economic and political system remains an alternative to the Kim regime and offers a considerably higher average standard of living, according to Statistics Korea, a South Korean government agency. Analysts say by sealing its population away from any contacts with the outside world, especially with South Korea, the regime may hope to avoid internal unrest.
There is always a threat of instability, a threat, a danger that any outbreak of instability in North Korea will provoke essentially German-style regime collapse. It might be good for the average North Korean, even though it's open to debate. It's not going to be a kind of, blessing, unconditional, even for the common people. For the elite, it's likely to be a disaster, and they understand it. They have to maintain stability, and the best way to maintain stability is to have somebody from the Kim clan in power.
But North Korea is not only concerned about an internal collapse. The Kim regime also adopted Songun, or a military-first policy, in the 90s as the Soviet Union fell.
He was not certain what to do when the communist governments across the globe collapsed in the early 1990s.
Kim Jong-il's solution? A system that puts not only his family at the center of North Korean life, but also the military, an institution presented as the nation's protectors in an increasingly hostile world.
So he decided to create a system, he wanted to create a system, which would be based on the special position of the military. If you like, he wanted to transform a Communist Party-centered dictatorship into a military-centered dictatorship.
The army has always been a key pillar of the Kim regime.
Japan or South Korea, these are all states with much larger economies and conventionally at least more powerful militaries. Initially, South Korea was much weaker than North Korea, much less so today, and much more reliant on the United States for its security. South Korea is still reliant on the US nuclear umbrella, but in conventional terms, the South Korean military is probably quite a lot stronger than the North Korean military now.
To this day, the Korean People's Army is one of the largest armies in the world, fielding 1.3 million active duty soldiers. Pyongyang says it spends around 15% of its GDP on the military, but experts say the true amount may be more than double. It also spent more than $500,000 on its nuclear program in 2022 alone, according to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Much of the North's propaganda is focused on what it views as a mortal enemy, the United States.
해외 정치 활동을 우리 혁명 발전의 기본 장애물 최대의 주적인 미국을 제압하고 굴복시키는 데 초점을 맞추고 지향시켜 나가야 합니다.
Washington has returned the favor by imposing sanctions on Pyongyang, as well as keeping a sword of Damocles hanging over the country. After the September 11, 2001 terror attacks in the U.S., Washington listed North Korea among a collection of rogue states it hoped to put out of action.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Later foreign interventions, like U.S. involvement in the war that toppled Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, reportedly fueled the Kim's concerns about collapse.
Unconfirmed reports about Gaddafi being captured. Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
But the balance shifted in 2006 when the North acquired an ultimate tool of deterrence against foreign military intervention: nuclear weapons.
미국 번터 전역이 우리의 핵 타격 사정권 안에 있으며 핵 단추가 내 사무실 책상 위에 항상 놓여 있다는 것. 이는 결코 위협이 아닌 현실임을 똑바로 알아야 합니다.
The North Korean government thinks that having nuclear weapons will ensure their security, and they think that having as many different kinds of delivery systems that will allow them to hit the United States, South Korea, Japan, or whoever else may threaten them, they think that the more warheads they build up, the bigger their arsenal, the more delivery systems they have, the more secure they will be.
But every nuclear test has further alienated North Korea in the eyes of the international community. The United Nations has adopted resolutions calling for a new round of sanctions after every nuclear test.
미국이 노리는 목적은 우리의 핵 그 자체를 제거해버리자는 데도 있지만 궁극적으로는 핵을 내려놓게 하고 자위권 행사력까지 포기 또는 열세하게 맹글어 우리 정권을 어느 때든 붕괴시켜 버리자는 것입니다.
It has been 76 years and 3 generations of rulers since North Korea's founding, and the country remains one of the most reclusive nations on earth. Are there signs that anything will change?
People are significantly better informed about the outside world, partially because they are listening to foreign broadcasts, but largely because they watch smuggled South Korean videos, and many of them, maybe up to 500,000 altogether, accumulative, have been in China.
There is a growing appetite for better living conditions in North Korea. In an apparent bid to solidify his rule, Kim has responded by taking inspiration from his powerful communist neighbor, China.
Kim Jong-un came to power in December 2011, when China was making great success. So for him, the communist system was a system which worked very well in China, a system which worked very well in Vietnam, why not in North Korea?
Kim Jong-un's government engaged in economic reforms meant to strengthen the country's market economy and eventually turn it into an industrial powerhouse. Dozens of residential districts were built in Pyongyang, while a consumerist middle class took shape. However, as much as Kim wanted to emulate China, international sanctions imposed because of the country's nuclear ambitions stood in the way.
从中国那方面来说，就是说很多属于说联合国禁运的东西呢，双方之间的这个是资金交流方面，也可以说切断了。
The Chinese model Kim Jong-un wanted to emulate suddenly became essentially unapplicable because He wanted to use cheap labor. Like in China, like in Vietnam, like in Korea, South Korea a long time ago. He wanted to import raw material and spare parts from overseas, to produce finished goods and to export finished goods. But it's impossible because sanctions are very tough.
Economic reforms were also accompanied by political reforms. Lankov says the army's primacy is fading amid a return to a more communist-style governance where the party takes a central role. Workers' Party congresses are held regularly. Some North Korea watchers say Kim Jong-un's reforms may have helped the regime strengthen itself enough to survive at least another half-century. But the supreme leader's health also continues to worsen, according to Seoul's spy agency. Already, experts question what comes next, including whether the next Kim family transition will shift power to a daughter instead of a son.